This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes only. Any names, places, or events described are purely imaginary. The following content is intended to create suspense and atmosphere, not to promote fear or harm. Viewer discretion is advised. Everyone was gone by morning. Not slowly. Not quietly. Just gone. No signs of struggle. No alarms. No explanations. One night, a small place breathed like any other, and by sunrise, it felt like the world had forgotten it ever existed. Imagine waking up in a town where silence is heavier than sound, where doors stand open but no one answers, and where your own footsteps feel like a mistake. That's where this story begins. The town sat far from highways and city lights, surrounded by empty roads and fields that stretched until the sky swallowed them. It was the kind of place people passed through without noticing, a quiet American town where everyone knew each other's routines. Nights were calm, almost comforting. Porch lights glowed softly, and the air carried familiar smells of earth and old wood. But that night, something felt wrong, subtly, almost politely wrong. The wind stopped moving. Dogs didn't bark. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath, as if the darkness itself was listening. By morning, the calm had turned unnatural. The sun rose like it always did, spilling light over houses, cars, and empty streets, but no one came out to greet it. Coffee went cold on kitchen tables. Televisions hummed to no audience. Cars were parked halfway out of driveways, as if people had stepped out for a moment and never returned. There was no blood, no broken windows, no signs of violence, just absence. The most terrifying kind. The story follows one person who notices the silence before understanding it. A young adult man, returning home after a long night shift, expecting nothing more than sleep and routine. At first, he thought it was early morning quiet, the peaceful kind. But the longer he stayed awake, the more the silence pressed in. No neighbors leaving for work. No children waiting for school buses. No voices drifting through open windows. Even the town's old church stood unlocked, empty, its bell untouched. As he walked through the streets, unease grew. Every familiar place felt wrong without people. A grocery store door swung gently in the breeze. A phone rang inside an empty house and never stopped. The sense of being watched crawled up his spine, even though there was no one to see. It felt as if the town itself was aware of him, as if something unseen was waiting to see what he would do next. He searched for answers, calling out names, knocking on doors, checking places where people should have been. Each attempt only deepened the mystery. There were no notes. No warnings. No signs of evacuation. Just a town frozen between one night and one morning, caught in a moment that refused to move forward. The horror wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, patient, and deeply personal. As fear settled in, questions began to surface. Did everyone leave together, or did they disappear one by one? Was this place abandoned by chance, or chosen on purpose? And most unsettling of all, why was he still there? The longer he remained alone, the stronger the feeling became that the town hadn't emptied by accident. That whatever took the others knew exactly who it wanted to leave behind. The air felt thicker as the sun climbed higher, as if daylight itself was struggling to exist there. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't. Sounds echoed too long. Every reflection in glass felt slightly delayed. The town looked normal, but nothing felt alive. It was as if reality had stepped away for a moment, and forgotten to come back. And just when he began to believe he truly was alone, he heard something, a sound that didn't belong to silence. A slow, deliberate noise coming from somewhere deep within the town. Not a voice. Not a scream. Just a reminder that maybe everyone wasn't gone after all. Or worse, that something else had taken their place. The sound came again, clearer this time. It echoed faintly between the houses, slow and uneven, like something being dragged across concrete. The young man stood frozen in the middle of the street, his breath shallow, listening. When the noise stopped, the silence rushed back in, thicker than before. He told himself it was just something loose in the wind, maybe a sign swinging somewhere. But the air was still. Not even the fog moved. He decided to follow the sound before fear convinced him to stay where he was. With each step, memories of the town surfaced, barbecues in backyards, quiet evenings, neighbors waving from porches. It made the emptiness feel cruel, like a joke taken too far. He noticed small details that didn't make sense. Streetlights still on despite the sunrise. A dog leash tied to a fence with no dog nearby. A child's bicycle lying on its side, wheels slowly turning as if it had just fallen. As he moved deeper into town, he realized something else was wrong. His phone showed no signal, no emergency alerts, no missed calls. The time flickered, jumping forward and backward by minutes. He tried the radio in an abandoned car. Only static answered, broken occasionally by a low hum that almost sounded like distant breathing. He shut it off quickly, his hands trembling. The town had a history most people avoided talking about. It was built decades ago near land locals believed was unsettled. There were old stories, nothing specific, just whispers passed down by older residents. Stories about people leaving suddenly in the past, about nights when the town felt watched. He remembered laughing at those stories as a teenager. Standing there now, alone, they didn't feel funny anymore. He reached the town center, where the old clock tower loomed overhead. The clock was stopped at 3:17 a.m. No matter how long he stared, the hands didn't move. As he circled the building, the dragging sound returned, closer now. His heart pounded so hard he felt dizzy. He called out, his voice cracking, but the sound stopped the moment he spoke. That's when he noticed footprints on the ground. They weren't fresh, but they were clear, bare feet, leading toward the library. Too many prints. Overlapping. As if dozens of people had walked the same path at the same time. Yet none of them led back. Inside the library, the air was cold and smelled of dust and old paper. Lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly. Books were scattered across tables, open to random pages. Every clock inside showed the same time as the tower. As he moved between the shelves, he felt it again, that sensation of being watched, of not being alone despite the emptiness. A memory hit him suddenly. The night before, he had noticed his neighbors acting strangely. Quiet. Distracted. A woman across the street standing on her porch long after dark, staring at nothing. A man sitting in his car with the engine running, unmoving. At the time, it felt meaningless. Now it felt like a warning he had ignored. The dragging sound echoed again, this time from upstairs. Slowly, he climbed the steps, each creak sounding far too loud. At the top, he found a row of mirrors lining the hallway, something he didn't remember ever being there. As he passed them, his reflection lagged behind, moving a fraction of a second too late. His stomach twisted. When he stopped, the reflection smiled. He didn't. He backed away, bumping into a table. The mirrors returned to normal instantly, as if nothing had happened. He stood there shaking, trying to convince himself his mind was breaking under stress. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just fear. Something had changed in the town itself. Outside, the fog thickened, rolling through the streets like it was alive. Shapes moved within it, not clear, not solid, but deliberate. The town felt smaller now, tighter, as if invisible walls were closing in. He realized with sudden clarity that whatever happened didn't occur in one moment. It had been building, quietly, patiently. As the clock tower began to tick again, slow, uneven, wrong, he understood the most terrifying thought of all. The town wasn't empty. It was waiting. He left the library in a hurry, the image of that delayed reflection burned into his mind. Outside, the fog had thickened into a low, crawling blanket that swallowed the street up to his knees. Every step felt uncertain, like the ground itself might vanish. The clock tower behind him ticked again, slow, uneven beats that felt more like a pulse than time. He didn't look back. Something deep inside warned him that if he did, he wouldn't like what he saw. As he moved toward his house, the town felt different now. Closer. The buildings seemed to lean inward, windows dark and watchful. He heard faint whispers riding the fog, too soft to understand, yet clearly not the wind. When he stopped, they stopped. When he walked, they followed. Panic crept into his chest, tightening with every breath. Halfway down the street, he noticed a porch light flicker on by itself. Then another. One by one, lights glowed throughout the town, illuminating empty homes like eyes opening in the dark. He felt exposed, standing alone in the road. He hurried faster, but the fog thickened with him, matching his pace as if it knew where he was going. When he reached his house, the front door was already open. He was certain he had locked it. The thought sent a chill through him colder than the fog. Inside, everything looked untouched, his jacket still on the chair, his mug in the sink, the faint smell of stale coffee in the air. But something was wrong. The house felt occupied, not by a person, but by a presence that didn't belong. The silence inside wasn't empty. It was crowded. He moved room to room, calling out despite knowing no one would answer. In the bedroom, the mirror above the dresser was covered by a sheet. He didn't remember doing that. With shaking hands, he pulled the fabric away. His reflection stared back at him normally this time, but the relief didn't last. Behind him, for just a second, shapes shifted in the glass, tall, thin silhouettes that faded the moment he turned around. A sudden knock echoed through the house. He froze. The knock came again, slow and deliberate, from the front door. His heart pounded as he approached, every instinct screaming not to open it. When he finally did, the porch was empty. But taped to the door was a piece of paper, yellowed and old. Written in uneven handwriting were 4 words, "You were supposed to go." Confusion turned into dread. Go where? With who? As he pulled the paper free, a memory surfaced, something he had almost forgotten. Months ago, a woman from town, an older local everyone called Mrs. Calder, had warned him during a late-night conversation at the gas station. She told him some places didn't let everyone stay forever. That when the time came, the town would decide who belonged. He remembered brushing it off as small-town nonsense. Mrs. Calder's house now sat dark and silent at the end of the road. The whispers grew louder, forming fragments of words he almost recognized. Names. Familiar ones. His neighbors. His friends. It sounded like they were calling him from far away, trapped somewhere just out of reach. He felt a pull toward the sound, a dangerous urge to follow it into the fog. He grabbed his keys and ran to his car. The engine turned over, coughing before finally starting. Relief washed over him, briefly. The radio burst to life on its own, playing a distorted recording of voices layered over each other, repeating the same phrase, "Morning already came." He shut it off, but the voices continued, now coming from inside his head. As he drove, the streets looped unnaturally, leading him past the same landmarks again and again. The clock tower. The library. The fallen bicycle. No matter which turn he took, the town refused to let him leave. The fog thickened until the headlights barely cut through it. Then, in the distance, he saw people. Dozens of figures stood in the road ahead, their backs turned to him. Relief surged through his fear. He slammed the brakes and stepped out, calling to them. Slowly, they began to turn. Their faces were wrong, blurred, hollow, like unfinished reflections. They opened their mouths, and the whispers became deafening. He stumbled backward, realizing the truth sinking in. Whatever took the town hadn't erased the people. It had changed them. And now, as the clock tower rang a single distorted chime, he understood the secondary horror he hadn't considered before. The town wasn't just waiting. It was preparing him. He backed away from the figures until his legs hit the car door. The fog thickened instantly, swallowing their shapes, but the sound of them remained a soft, uneven breathing that didn't match any living rhythm. He climbed back into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it without thinking. His hands shook so badly he struggled to turn the wheel. When he pressed the gas, the car moved forward, but the road seemed to stretch unnaturally, pulling away from him like something alive. Street signs twisted as he passed them, letters rearranging into words he didn't understand. Houses blurred together, repeating in patterns that made his head ache. Every turn felt familiar and wrong at the same time. The town no longer followed its own layout. It bent around him, guiding him back toward its center no matter how hard he tried to escape. The clock tower loomed again in the distance, closer than it should have been. The radio crackled back on by itself. This time, only one voice spoke, clearer than before, calm and almost kind. It sounded like his own. It told him to slow down. To stop fighting. To remember why he was chosen. He shouted and ripped the radio out, tossing it into the back seat, but the voice continued, echoing softly inside his skull. As he passed the school, he saw movement in the windows. Shadows shifted behind the glass, forming shapes that almost looked human. A bell rang once, sharp and distorted, sending a spike of fear through him. Memories flooded back, faces of classmates, teachers, people who had lived ordinary lives here. The thought that they were still here somehow, trapped between moments, made his chest tighten with panic. The car stalled near the town square. He tried the ignition again and again, but the engine refused to respond. The fog pressed in, curling around the car like fingers. He stepped out slowly, heart hammering. The square was lit now, every lamp glowing too brightly, casting long, warped shadows that moved even when he stood still. From the fog, figures emerged, not rushing, not threatening. Just watching. Their forms flickered, as if they struggled to stay solid. Some looked familiar. Too familiar. He recognized clothing, postures, the way one tilted their head. These were his neighbors. Or something wearing their shapes. When one of them stepped closer, he felt a pressure in his chest, a pull that made his thoughts blur. He remembered something then. A detail that had felt unimportant before. Weeks ago, flyers had appeared around town announcing a morning gathering at the square. No one talked about it, but everyone seemed aware of it. He hadn't gone. He'd worked late that night instead. The realization hit him hard enough to make him dizzy. "You stayed," the voice whispered, this time not from the radio, but from everywhere at once. The ground beneath his feet vibrated softly. The clock tower began to chime again, each strike slower than the last. With every sound, the figures stepped closer. Their faces remained unfinished, but their attention was focused entirely on him. He felt exposed, examined, as if the town itself was deciding what to do with him. He ran. His legs burned as he sprinted through the square, past the old fountain, toward the narrow streets beyond. The fog chased him, swallowing sound and distance. No matter how fast he moved, he could hear footsteps behind him, never gaining, never fading. He ducked into an alley, pressing himself against the cold brick wall, trying to steady his breathing. That's when he noticed the markings on the wall. Symbols carved deep into the stone, layered over each other as if done across many years. Some were faded, others fresh. All of them circled the same phrase, scratched again and again, morning chooses. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit him. His vision blurred. The whispers returned, gentler now, coaxing. Promising relief. Promising he wouldn't be alone anymore. He felt the terrifying urge to listen, to give in, to stop running from a town that clearly had no intention of letting him go. In the distance, the first hint of true daylight began to break through the fog. The figures paused, turning toward the rising light. The town held its breath. As the clock tower struck again, louder than before, he realized something that made his blood run cold. Morning wasn't just a time here. It was a decision. And the town was running out of patience. The light in the sky grew brighter, but it didn't bring comfort. It felt wrong, pale and strained, like daylight forcing itself into a place that didn't want it. The fog thinned just enough for the town to become visible again, and that's when he noticed something that made his heart drop. The buildings weren't the same. Doors were sealed shut now. Windows were dark, covered from the inside. The town was closing itself, piece by piece. The whispers stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse. From the center of the square, a figure stepped forward, one that didn't flicker or blur like the others. This one was solid. Real. A woman stood there, elderly, her back straight, her eyes sharp and aware. He recognized her instantly. Mrs. Calder. The woman from the gas station. The one who warned him. "You really don't remember, do you?" she said calmly. Relief and fear collided in his chest. She was alive. Or at least, still herself. He stumbled toward her, demanding answers, his voice breaking as weeks of terror poured out at once. She listened patiently, then sighed, as if disappointed rather than surprised. "You were never meant to wake up alone," she said. She told him the truth in fragments, as if saying too much at once would break something. The town didn't vanish overnight. It shifted. On certain mornings, rare ones, the town chose who stayed and who crossed over. Most people were taken together, moved into a state that wasn't death, but wasn't life either. A preservation. A holding place. They became part of the town's memory. But someone always stays behind, she continued. Someone to witness it. Someone to carry the weight of knowing. His stomach twisted. Why me? Mrs. Calder looked at him with something close to pity. Because you already did this once. The world seemed to tilt. She explained that years ago, before he ever moved away and came back, the same thing happened. Another morning. Another choosing. He had been younger then. Afraid. And given the same option he was being given now. Stay awake and remember, or forget everything and rejoin the town later, unaware. Last time, he chose to forget. That's not possible, he whispered, but deep down, memories stirred. A dream he'd had for years. A morning with no sound. A feeling of loss he could never explain. "You promised you wouldn't run again," she said quietly. The figures around the square began to move closer, more clearly shaped now. Their faces sharpened just enough for recognition. He saw his neighbors. Friends. People he cared about. Their eyes were empty, but not hostile. They were waiting. He backed away, shaking his head. "I won't become that. I won't disappear." Mrs. Calder's expression hardened. "Then the town will take something else from you." The ground trembled. The clock tower rang again, louder, deeper, like a final warning. Pain surged through his head as memories flooded in, past mornings, past choices, past screams he had buried deep inside himself. He dropped to his knees, clutching his skull as the truth became unavoidable. He wasn't trapped because he stayed behind. He was trapped because the town remembered him. The fog rushed back in, wrapping around his body, pressing against his chest until breathing felt like drowning. The figures reached out, not violently, but insistently. He felt his strength fading, his thoughts slowing, the edges of his identity beginning to blur. Mrs. Calder knelt in front of him. "This time," she said softly, "you don't get to forget." The sky brightened further, and with it came a new horror. He saw another version of himself standing at the edge of the square, calm, empty-eyed, already part of the town. Waiting to replace him. The realization crushed him. There was no escape. No rescue. Only a choice between being consumed or becoming the thing that lured the next witness into staying. As the clock tower struck again, the fog swallowed his scream, and the town began to breathe in unison, ready for another morning. What would you do in this situation? Do you think the protagonist will survive? The fog tightened around him until the world shrank to a narrow circle of breath and fear. The figures closed in, their movements slow and synchronized, as if the town itself guided them. He forced himself to stand, legs shaking, mind screaming that if he didn't move now, he never would. Somewhere beneath the terror, anger sparked. He refused to disappear quietly. Not again. He shoved past the nearest figure. It felt wrong to touch it, cold and hollow, like gripping thick smoke shaped into flesh. A sharp pain shot up his arm, but he didn't stop. He ran toward the clock tower, instinct pulling him there. If the town had a heart, he felt certain that was it. The ground trembled harder with every step, cracks forming beneath his feet. The whispers turned into a roar, voices overlapping, begging and warning at once. Memories flooded his mind, moments from a life he barely remembered. Standing in this same square years ago. Crying. Promising himself he'd never come back. The realization gave him strength and crushed him at the same time. He reached the base of the tower and slammed the door shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the hollow space. Inside, the tower groaned, ancient and strained, as if it resented his presence. The stairs spiraled upward into darkness. He climbed, lungs burning, fingers scraping against stone slick with moisture. Halfway up, the tower shook violently. Dust rained down. The clock above began to spin backward, each tick scraping against his nerves. He shouted into the emptiness, demanding answers, demanding it stop. His voice bounced back distorted, unfamiliar. At the top, he found the mechanism, gears twisted and rusted, moving on their own. Embedded between them were objects that made his blood run cold. Watches. Phones. Jewelry. Personal things. Proof that others had stood here before him. Proof that none of them had left. Mrs. Calder's voice drifted up from below, calm and steady. She told him it was too late. That the town always collected what it was owed. That the cycle could not be broken. He grabbed a loose metal rod from the floor and drove it into the gears. The tower screamed, a sound that wasn't metal or stone, but something alive. The clock froze. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The whispers cut off. The fog outside hesitated. Then the tower pushed back. A force slammed him against the wall, knocking the air from his lungs. Visions crashed into him, countless mornings, countless witnesses. People fighting. People begging. People giving in. He saw himself again and again, choosing fear, choosing escape, choosing forgetfulness. The town had never needed to hunt him. He had always returned. With a final surge of desperation, he ripped the rod free and drove it deeper, shattering the mechanism. The clock face outside cracked, sending shards raining into the square. The figures below screamed, not in pain, but in loss. The fog exploded outward. For a moment, the town was silent. Sunlight poured in, warm and real. The buildings stopped shifting. The ground steadied. He collapsed, laughing and crying at once, convinced he had done it. That he had broken the cycle. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned slowly. Another man stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard. Same height. Same face. Same fear in his eyes. The other him looked around in horror, then locked eyes with him. Understanding hit like a knife. The town didn't need one witness. It needed two. The clock began to tick again, steady this time. Normal. The sunlight outside softened. The fog thinned into harmless mist. The other him staggered backward, shouting questions, demanding answers he didn't have the strength to give. Below, the town came alive. Doors opened. Voices returned. Morning routines resumed as if nothing had ever happened. As the tower door closed on its own, he felt the pull settle into his bones. He was calm now. Empty. Ready. When the other him screamed for help, he didn't move. The clock struck once. By morning, everyone would be gone. Except one. Morning arrived the way it always did, quietly and without apology. Sunlight spilled across the town, soft and warm, touching houses, streets, and windows as if nothing had ever been wrong. Birds returned to the trees. Engines started. Doors opened. People stepped outside, stretching, yawning, greeting one another like it was just another ordinary day. No one noticed the clock tower. Inside it, the young man stood alone. He could still hear echoes of the night, the whispers, the screams, the moment everything broke and stitched itself back together. But outside, the town moved on. The fog had lifted completely, leaving behind no trace of what had happened. No broken streets. No shadowy figures. No missing people. It was as if the town had rewritten itself, smoothing over the horror like it never existed. He walked down the tower steps slowly, his movements calm, almost practiced. Fear was still there, buried deep, but it no longer controlled him. Something else did. A weight. A responsibility he didn't ask for and couldn't escape. When he stepped into the square, people passed him without a second glance. Some smiled politely. Others nodded. None of them recognized him. Not truly. He tried to speak, to warn someone, anyone, but the words dissolved in his throat. It wasn't that he couldn't talk. It was that no one was listening. He understood now. The town didn't erase witnesses. It absorbed them. Memories surfaced with painful clarity. Every unanswered question finally made sense. The reason the town had felt familiar when he returned years ago. The dreams of empty streets. The unshakable sense that he'd lost something important without knowing what it was. He had survived before, but survival came at a cost, memory traded for ignorance. This time, the town didn't offer mercy. He passed the library. Inside, the clocks all worked again. The mirrors reflected normally. No delayed movements. No smiles that didn't belong. But when he looked closely, he saw faint markings on the walls, nearly invisible in daylight. Names carved deep, worn smooth by time. Witnesses. He went home, or what used to be his home. Another family lived there now. Happy. Unaware. He stood on the sidewalk watching them through the window, feeling like a ghost observing the living. He realized then that he wasn't meant to have a place here anymore. He was part of the structure now, like the roads and buildings. Present, but unnoticed. As the day went on, he felt the town breathing with him. Not threatening. Not kind. Balanced. He could sense shifts before they happened. Hear subtle changes in tone. When someone lingered too long at night. When curiosity turned into awareness. The town didn't speak, but it communicated all the same. By evening, he found himself back at the gas station. Mrs. Calder stood there, just as she always had. Older. Tired. Free. She looked at him with understanding and quiet sorrow. "It's your turn now," she said. He wanted to argue. To ask why the cycle existed, who started it, what the town truly was. But he already knew the answer he'd get. Some things didn't have origins. They just continued. "What happens to me?" he asked. She paused. "You watch. You wait. And when the next one notices the silence, you make sure they don't look away too soon." With that, she walked past him, out of town, down the long road that led somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Night fell again. The town lights flickered on, one by one. The air grew still. Familiar. Heavy. He stood in the square, feeling the slow pull of time bending inward. He knew what would happen when the next morning came. He knew someone would be awake when they shouldn't be. Someone would feel the silence press too hard. And he would be there. Not as a savior. Not as a monster. As part of the town's memory. As the clock tower struck midnight, he glanced at his reflection in a darkened window. For just a moment, it lagged behind him only a fraction of a second. Then it caught up and stared back, calm and waiting. Morning was coming. And someone would be chosen. What do you think the town really is? Do you want a sequel exploring the next witness, or the origin of the town?